On today's Locked On Jayhawks, the 10 most prevalent storylines for KU football in 2024 and our defensive tackle room preview.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Eric Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and you can tune into the show, Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We're talking the 10 biggest storylines, most prevalent storylines for KU football in the 2024 season. We'll get to the defensive tackle room preview and some interesting comments from Lance Leipold post their camp scrimmage from Wednesday night. So we'll touch on those as well on the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. Sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So let's get to our top 10 storylines for Kansas Jayhawks football in the 2024 season. Let's start with number 10. How will Kansas bolster the rest of its recruiting class? You know, as much as it is prevalent what's on the field and what this team does and everything, you're looking to consistently build up the program and consistently looking to pile on good recruiting class after good recruiting class, so that this season, which is seen as kind of a pinnacle moment, you have all these seniors, all these players coming back, what could be a really good team. It's not the last time. It's not, oh, it built to this, and then in a few years it's crumbling down, that you can sustain that success and that you can build on the success and recruit at a higher level. Currently, Kansas has 15 commits. That was after last week. They added Chris McCorkle, who's one of their highest rated recruits in the class from cornerback position. It's a solid class overall. All 15 were given 84 grades or higher by 24/7 Sports. Out of comp, the class of 2020, which was a Les Miles class, which was 5 years ago, that had 28 commits. This one again, 15. And of the 28 commits, 16 were rated 84 or higher. So this one has almost the same amount of 84 or higher guys as that 2020 class, and it has 13 less commits in total. And you might be saying, well, what was the class of 2020? If you were an everydayer, you would already know we reevaluated the recruiting class. That was a class that included Mello Dotson, Kobe Bryant, LJ Arnold, Jalon Daniels, Luke Grimm, Bryce Cabledew, among others. So it worked out pretty well for KU. How are they going to bolster the rest of the class? Because it's going to be a very important recruiting class. You're losing like 30 seniors at the end of this season. And who knows if you lose anybody else to the transfer portal or NFL draft or anything like that, that you're going to have a lot to replace. And you have to find a way. Obviously, the transfer portal will be a big part of that, but building those foundations in recruiting is important as well. Number 9, how much better can the special teams get for KU football this season? So depending where you look at like ESPN SP Plus, they're kind of middle of the pack of the country. You look at like ESPN FPI, they're still like in the bottom 30 of the country. Either way, it was not a good special teams. I think at best you would say it was average. Over the first half of the season, though, the special teams was, I would say, solid. I mean, you got the punt return from Trevor Wilson. Seth Keller was making all his kicks. I think the blocked PAT troubles, did it start in the UCF game? That was kind of the one, but more of the PAT troubles or the special teams issues happened in the back half of the season. If you can just bottle up what you did in the first half and carry that over a full season, you might end up being a top 40, top 50 special teams unit in the country. And that slight improvement could be the difference of you winning one game. I mean, heck, you were one possible special teams mistake, either having, the muff punt by Trevor Wilson, most notably. I also think back to the blocked PAT that was returned for 2 for Kansas State. Like, maybe if either one of those 2 plays doesn't happen, maybe you win that game. Maybe that's the difference between you winning 10 games, having a double-digit win season, right? So even one mistake over the course of a season, because special teams has less plays than the offense or defense, that can magnify a win or a loss for your team. Number 8, games at Children's Mercy Park and Arrowhead Stadium. And I guess if you want to lump in the stadium construction with this, which the new stadium is in the EA Sports College Football 25 video game, so you can get an early look at it, kind of playing along that way. it's going to be interesting to see what the impact of that is for KU football. Obviously, there's been a lot made about them playing on grass now as part of these with these new stadiums. How does that kind of affect things with some of these games? They're obviously practicing a lot on grass, not every day, but for the most part on grass. Will that have any effect? I don't know. A lot of players have said that it's actually helpful from keeping them healthy, which sign me up. If you're a talented team, which Kansas is, right, staying healthy is very important. So that would be great if that helps with that. Beyond that, what is the home field advantage impact? Like, if they're selling out Arrowhead, it's going to be a better home field advantage than what they had because it'll just be more people. But if it's a half empty stadium, how does that affect it? I certainly think the Children's Mercy Park, those will be sold out with just under 20,000 people. And that could actually be a better environment because it's so close knit and tight together that it could even feel like you're louder because everybody is right on top of you. So how do those games kind of affect it? And specifically when you look at like the Colorado and Iowa State games at Arrowhead, what if you end up only having like a 60-40 advantage in the fan numbers and stuff? Like, how does that kind of affect this season? Does it lead to one extra game that would have been a normal home win that because you're playing on a neutral site, essentially, does it end up changing things? I don't know. Number 7, will the defense be better than last season despite not having Austin Booker? You look at the secondary, you're back in tow. You do lose Kenny Logan as well as part of this. You do lose some starting linebackers, notably Rich Miller, who was a captain on that end of the football for KU. But it feels like you have an opportunity to be just as good, if not better, than you were a season ago defensively, because you still do bring back so much in the secondary. And you do have guys buddying for all-conference, all-American honors like Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson. You look at the interior of the D-line, you feel good about being maybe 5 solid deep, maybe even 6, because it seems like a couple of the young guys with Calvin and Harold are kind of coming on in the interior there. You feel good about strong defensive end. I feel good about the linebackers, that you're actually going to be more talented and athletic there than you were a season ago. The big one is losing Austin Booker, who was just as impactful as any defender in the conference a season ago. How do you replace that? And can you get at least close to the production with a lot of really talented guys in the room? But how ready are they going to be in maybe year 1 of college football or as a redshirt freshman in the case of like Bai Jobe? So can the defense, even despite losing, what you could argue is one of the best defensive players in the conference a season ago, be better than it was a season ago? It almost sounds a little tough to do, but they kind of did the same thing the year before after losing Lonnie Phelps. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But if Kansas is going to win a Big 12 title, we've talked about this before, defense has to at least get a little bit better. Number 6, how will the offense look under Jeff Grimes? So it's going to be really interesting. I don't know how much we're going to learn in the first game. We'll learn a little bit against Lindenwood, but we've seen this before. Like, KU is not going to show, nor should they, their full playbook and everything they want to do schematically in that first game against an FCS opponent, especially in the case of Lindenwood, one that has not been a great FCS team. I mean, they're 10 years ago, they were like in the NAIA, right? So they're making a big jump up. And you go back 2 years ago, Kansas ran, I think, 1, maybe 2 like option plays in that first game. And then all of a sudden, their second game of the season at West Virginia, they're like running it religiously. So you're not going to see everything, and that's not going to tell us everything, but maybe it'll give us a little bit. But by the time you get to your second and third game, you're at Illinois. That's a game that very much matters. Your first conference game is at West Virginia. You're playing UNLV. You won 9 games in your third game of the year. You're going to learn a lot in those games. So what can we take away from his past stops at Baylor and BYU about maybe what could be a little bit different from his time there at Kansas? And I do think he is mixing in probably concepts that Kansas has been running, plays that Kansas has been running, formations that Kansas has been running, terminology and lingo that Kansas has been doing. And to a certain standpoint, like going into the system of what Kansas has been doing, that he will sway towards that to where it won't be quite the same as what he did at Baylor and BYU. But still, Baylor ran 11 more plays per game last season than Kansas. I find that a little bit interesting. You go back a couple years before that, though, it was only like 3 more plays per game. So maybe that last year was more about Baylor just being down in a lot of games and having to, throw a lot of passes and get back into the game and the clock stopping, stuff like that. But they threw the ball 37 times per game versus 34 runs per game last season. So that's actually more passes than runs, which KU last season ran the ball 38 times per game. They only threw the ball 24 times per game, which is, I think, very interesting when you look at some of those numbers. But again, I don't want to really use last year's Baylor as the best indication of what a Jeff Grimes offense looks like, because last year's Baylor just got worn down with some of the players playing a lot of young guys, and things just weren't going well. If you look at 2022 at Baylor, they threw the ball 30 times per game and they ran the ball 41 times per game. In 2021, they threw the ball 26 times per game and ran the ball 40 times per game. And then in 2020 at BYU, which he had a top 3 pick in the NFL draft at quarterback and Zach Wilson, they threw the ball 31 times per game and ran the ball 35 times per game. So I think you can maybe view a few more plays per game. Where's the split's going to be? If you do go back to 2022 Kansas, when Jalon Daniels was in there more, it was 28.5 passes per game for Kansas and a little over 34 runs per game. So where's that split going to be? That's a lot of seasons where he had at Baylor or whatever, where he had 40 or 40 plus runs per game for the running backs. So maybe even more possibility for Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw back there. All right, we're going to get on to our top 5 and then our defensive tackle preview and the latest with Lance Leipold on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We're brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You might even think with football around the corner and basketball over, it's the dead period, but it really is not. We still got Olympics going through the weekend. And once Olympics end, you're going to feel like you're right around the corner to football. You might be wanting to get your futures bets in for football. Obviously, the Royals killing it right now, sticking in tightly for that wild card race. Bobby Witt is killing it in the MVP race. There's plenty to bet on right now. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily, which is going to make it even more fun, or find other things that maybe you didn't know you loved, but you find some passion in watching them when you bet on them. That's right. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com to start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Happy Friday to you here on Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making this your first listen every day. And don't forget, you can check out all across our Locked On Podcast Network, whether you're looking for other college football teams, just broadly, Locked On College Football, NBA, NFL. You can find it all across our podcast network. All right, into the top 5 for most prevalent storylines for KU football here in 2024. Let's get to number 5. Will Devin Neal break the all-time KU rushing record? Now, this kind of goes into a wider question about something we talked about yesterday, which you would have caught if you're an everydayer, is the legacy of Devin Neal and where's that going to kind of sit? So Devin Neal has 3,077 career rushing yards. That is 4th all-time at Kansas. He is 515 back of James Sims, who's in 3rd. He is 711 back of Tony Sands, who's in 2nd. And then he's 767 back of June Henley, who is the all-time career rushing leader for KU. Devin Neal is also got 33 career rushing touchdowns. That is 3rd. He's 1 behind James Sims. He's 8 back of June Henley. And beyond the career numbers, can he nab the single season numbers this season, right? Because if he does the single season, he'll obviously accomplish both of those. But you're looking at 1,457 rushing yards from John Cornish in 2006, 17 rushing touchdowns by June Henley in 1996. Certainly, if he's going to be, an All-American or Heisman candidate, you're probably going to have to surpass those numbers. So, I mean, I think it's a very real possibility that those things happen and that Devin has that kind of special season, which actually brings us into our number 4 storyline. Will the Jayhawks have their 4th ever top 10 Heisman finisher? So the other 3 have all been quarterbacks. John Hadel, I guess you could say John Hadel was more than a quarterback. He played all over the field, but for the Heisman season, mainly a quarterback. And then you have Bobby Douglas and David Janes. They all received votes in the past for KU football. Devin Neal, which is interesting because that's been kind of the, KU doesn't have the most storied football history if you're comparing to some of these other schools, but like running back position is one of those where if you're comparing your running backs to other colleges' best running backs, like you're able to be in that conversation, right? You got Gale Sayers, you got John Riggins, you got some of these guys who put up career numbers at Kansas that we just mentioned, like June Henley and Tony Sands, right? So you have guys who didn't even get to the career numbers, but just like talent-wise, like Puka Williams. I would have loved to see what he did in the Lance Leipold offense. Anyway, point being, it would be historic for this to happen for KU, and you don't see it as much with running backs getting as much Heisman love anymore, but we see guys finish 5th or 6th recently, right? I think back to like Kenneth Walker, for instance. I think he finished 6th and just missed out on New York, but everybody was like, why did this guy not get a New York invite? I don't know. I would think that if Devin Neal has the numbers, he will have a bit of the narrative at his back about being at Kansas and helping turn things around and being the local kid. I also think Kansas can have a great Devin Neal hashtag for Heisman, because he literally wears the number 4. So you just do Neal, hashtag Neal for Heisman. Boom. There starts your hashtag right now if anybody wants to get that going for me. But yeah, man, I think that they have a real chance to do it this year. If you think they can win the Big 12 or play in the Big 12 championship, then this becomes even more likely that they're at least in the conversation of that kind of becoming a thing and that kind of happening. So I kind of lean, obviously Jalon Daniels is a Heisman candidate too. That's entirely possible. I do lean toward Devin being the top front runner though on the team. Number 3 is, can Kansas finally beat Kansas State? You've lost 15 straight games to the Wildcats, and there have been some real, I guess you could say, heart wrenchers in their games that you felt like you should have won. The 2 that most come to mind, because there are other ones where KU maybe has hung in the game, or it's been closer than you expected, or they were competitive, but the 2 that most come to mind, one of them was the Peyton Bender game where he just drops back and the ball just comes out as they're driving at the end of the game. And that was not obviously a great KU team, but one that you could have at least snapped the streak and made real good memories at the end of it there. So that was unfortunate when that happened. But the other one is last year, right? And last year, whether you think of the Rich Miller drop pick 6 or the Trevor Wilson muff punt or the block PAT return for 2 points or some little things here or there, I mean, just excruciating to lose that game when you feel like you had them. You had that. It's the Dennis Green against the Bears. You had them and you let them off the hook, right? And it's got to end at some point, right? Maybe it's not this year. You're playing in Manhattan. That makes it tough. Kansas State's going to have a really good team this season. Now, for you to accomplish everything you want to, you don't necessarily have to win that game. You could lose that game and win out and still make the Big 12 championship game. But it wouldn't feel right unless you got that win. And I don't know, again, like I said, maybe we see this all the time. Like Iowa State had their great year where they just like couldn't beat Iowa, but they had their great year. They made the Fiesta Bowl and they beat Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl during whatever that was, 2020 season, but they still lost to Iowa. The next year they weren't as good of a team, but they did beat Iowa. So it's like sometimes you don't get it all in one season, but it would be pretty special for KU if they could. Okay, number 2, can Kansas win the Big 12 and make the college football playoff? That's obviously a giant storyline here. Can they do both of those things? And Kansas has never won their conference before in football. So like on its own, that would be such a ginormous accomplishment of what they could do. And then you start getting into the idea of, if you do that, you're hosting, well, not necessarily. You could have a bye in the playoff and then you're playing a 5 seed like Georgia or Alabama, and who knows how that goes. But you would still have so many great memories of the season. And can you at least just play for the Big 12 championship? That would be such a huge movement for this program going forward. And obviously they have the players to do it. They have the coaches to do it. They have the schedule to do it. It's just going to kind of come down to how they execute, how healthy they stay, and do they get a few breaks along the way and, execute to everything that they can possibly be, because boy, are they talented enough to do it. Our number 1 storyline, though, it's what we've been talking about all off season long. And it kind of, the reason it trumped number 2, even though number 2 really is the most important, is because it probably most correlates with, do you have that chance to win a Big 12, to make college football playoff? Number 1 is, will Jalon Daniels stay healthy? And this can be something that I've talked about before. It doesn't necessarily even have to be all 12 games. It'd be ideal if it was 12 games. And theoretically, this isn't just about Jalon staying, healthy in terms of playing the games. It's like, what if he's playing all 12 games, but 4 of them are 75% Jalon Daniels and he's not the same guy, right? We saw that Texas game a couple of years ago. It was his first game back from the injury in 2022. He was not the same in that Texas game, right? And so it's having a 100% or close to it. I guess nobody's 100% by the time the season ends. Jalon Daniels throughout the season for as many games you can possibly have, because he is such a dynamic player. You don't have the Jason Bean backup quarterback ability to throw in there this time. But if Jalon can stay healthy enough over the course of the season or a majority of the season, it gives you a real shot at winning the Big 12, at making the college football playoff, because he is just that good. But also you have that more risk because you don't have that backup in there. All right, let's get on to our defensive tackle room preview and the latest from what Lance Leipold had to say on Locked On Jayhawks. We are brought to you by Game Time. I love going to MLB games during the summer. Whether it's just to go and kind of hang out with friends, it's a good social event and you're having hot dogs or having a good time or going to watch a serious baseball game. I mean, once we get into like September specifically or like playoff baseball, it's amazing. But if you're looking for something to do even this weekend, Royals taking on the Cardinals sounds kind of interesting. You can get tickets to the game on Game Time. And you don't have to worry that it's like, oh, this is such short notice. Are tickets going to be available? Or we're going to be able to find good prices? Guess what? Because Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, makes getting tickets faster and easier with the prices actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have their last minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Finishing things up with a defensive tackle preview on another Football Friday here, and then most interesting stuff from Leipold at the camp scrimmage. So the players here at the defensive tackle room, DJ Withers, he's a redshirt junior. Caleb Taylor, he's a senior. Marcus Calvin and Blake Harrell are both redshirt freshmen. Sounds like both of them have been impressing and maybe ready to take that Tommy Dunn, DJ Withers step from a couple years ago where they slowly moved their way up into the rotation. For what it's worth, Withers, Taylor, and then I think Withers probably going to be starting. Taylor, Javier Darrett, who's a redshirt senior, transfer from North Dakota State. Keenan Caldwell, redshirt junior. Tommy Dunn, a redshirt junior, probably in that conversation for being the other starter. I think I would lean Taylor right now, but it could be Dunn or Darrett. I think those would not be surprising either. Maybe Graydon Grimes. He's a true freshman. I'm not sure if they're going to eventually use him as a strong defensive end, as a defensive tackle, so I'll just bring him up here. And then you have walk-ons Grady Seifert, who's a redshirt freshman, and Lance Bassett, who's a redshirt freshman. I'll be honest, Bassett, good size, really quick. Got to watch him a lot at Lawrence High School. So right now you have like Cole Petras, who I believe is a walk-on competing for actual snaps at one of the defensive end spots after a couple years in the program. I would not be surprised if that's like Lance Bassett down the road. I think he has that kind of potential. Anyway, biggest storyline here. Will there be a breakout all Big 12 level player from a solid group? I think you feel solid about your 5 deep. And then if you do get Harold and Calvin taking that step up, you feel even better about going 6 deep or 7 deep or whatever it ends up being. But the question is, do you have more than just, solid pieces? Do you have at least one piece who can be that kind of all Big 12 level guy, right? Or, and I'm not even saying necessarily first team where you're like a first round draft pick or something, but being, all Big 12 honorable mention, being all Big 12 second team or something like that. Like somebody who has a really good season and gives you a handful of sacks, because you are losing a lot of sack production, pass rush production from Austin Booker. You didn't get a lot of pass rush production from the D tackles last year. They still did their job. They plugged up running lanes a lot better than the season before. They still got some pressures even when they always didn't get sacks. Like they did a serviceable job for you a season ago. But can you go from serviceable to having somebody, get 4 or 5 sacks from that position and take some of that pressure off of that pass rushing position that you lost with Austin Booker? And maybe that's a guy like DJ Withers. And then the other storyline here, which young player will take on those Dunn Withers internal development and step up this year? Like I said, it sounds kind of like Marcus Calvin and Blake Harrell are doing that, but which one of the two is maybe going to do it most? And you fast forward a year on this defensive line to 2025. Okay, now Caleb Taylor's graduated. Now Javier Darrett has graduated. And now you end up with 3 seniors in Withers, Dunn, and Keenan Caldwell. But that means if you're rotating 4 or 5 defensive tackles in a year, both those guys are probably going to be asked to play in 2025. And then you fast forward again to 2026. Okay, now Withers, Dunn, Taylor, Darrett, who am I forgetting? Caldwell, like they're all gone. So now you're both being asked to be the starters. So you have to continue on this linear progress. And it sounds like they are making that good progress. Okay, most interesting stuff from the Leipold scrimmage or what he said. If you watch the video or watch the press conference after, he mentioned Jalon Daniels did play in the 11-on-11. So that's obviously good to see. Made a positive mention for Trevor Wilson. And with Jeff Grimes, there's been a lot of talk that there will be more like receiver screens. That's something that he's liked to do. And we haven't seen that like a ton at Kansas. Well, Wilson is probably the best guy with the ball in his hands in the open field among the KU receivers. So it would make sense that he is excelling maybe in this specific offense under Jeff Grimes. Leipold also mentioned Dean Miller, DJ Warner, Tommy Dunn, linebacker crew, Logan Brantley. He mentioned a lot of guys, but I thought that was interesting that those guys really stepping up. He also mentioned 3 kickers in the competition. So hello, Tabor Allen to the competition, which I don't think we had really heard before. Sounded like he has the strongest leg, but maybe not as accurate as the other guys. Maybe he's starting to make inroads on that. And if he has the strongest leg, maybe that gives him the highest ceiling. I don't know. And then another mention of that Bryce Foster can play guard. So that continues to be reiterated to us. Maybe I'm starting to wonder if that's more of a thing, and that Shane Bumgardner looks really good. It's obviously a good problem to have. You do wonder how much of that is motivation to try to make sure Bryce Foster, I don't know why he'd need to stay motivated, but, make sure you're not giving anything away, I guess. He also talked up Daryl Simmons on the offensive line. That is such a competitive offensive line for those starting 5, and even that 6th and 7th spots where you're going to have guys cross-training and coming in throughout the season and stuff like that. I feel really good about the competition on the O-line for KU. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time on Locked On Jayhawks. We could have some breaking news at some point, maybe some KU basketball stuff that we'll get to if we get to it. On Monday, we'll get to our early preview of KU's first 2 games, Kansas Lindenwood and Kansas Illinois, and the defensive end room preview. This has been Locked On Jayhawks. See you next time.